Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P. Joe Pisapia. With me today is Matthew Freedman. That's right, the Oracle, who apparently has it in his contract that he only has to do a show with me every 6 weeks. And had I known that, I would have negotiated for 8 somehow in there. But alas, he's here with me again. He is a sight for sore eyes. I'm happy to see him. I'm also happy to see my good pal, Andrew Erickson. I've been away on vacation for almost a week, which is a lot. You know, they talk about dog years and being away from things and how it feels. It's felt like forever since I did a football show here at Fantasy Pros. It's only been a week, but I am very happy to be back. Andrew Erickson, I know you missed me, buddy. So tell me the truth. Well, what did you do in the meantime? Did you keep yourself busy while I was gone?
I mean, we hung out with Ryan, so that was fun. He was filling in for you. We had some great guests on. We had some fun. I mean, if you have listened to the past podcast shows, I'm not sure that I would have missed you if you were listening back to the show. So I was having a ball.
There you go. So life is better for Andrew Erickson when I'm not around. So I'm even more glad to be back now. And shout out to Ryan for holding it down for me. I don't want to be remiss in forgetting about him. Ryan does a great job every time. I actually got to do a show with Ryan, little fantasy feud action there, where Fitz and I actually gave answers as opposed to Derek Brown and Andrew Erickson, who were just wrong all the time. And eventually someone had more points. Now, Matthew Freedman, as somebody who has also just recently come back from vacation, I know it is so nice to clear your mind, spend some time away. But at what point does the sense of impending doom hit you where you know, in 24 hours and 48 hours, however long it might be for you personally, where you know the mountain of work has been piling and what you're walking back into? Because I kind of felt that today.
July 5th. For me, that's when it starts. Today. The day that we are recording this, that's when it hits me that the rest of my life is over for the next 6 months. But it's great. I wouldn't want it any other way. After the 4th of July, you can feel the rush of football coming, and this is the best time of the year.
I agree. I feel like July 4th, that's the last time you have all the barbecues, you have some fun. You're like, okay, now I'm going to go into this cocoon for the next 6 months of my life, and maybe I'll see my family once in a while. But you're our family here at Fantasy Pros, and again, we're super excited. Not to mention our family's growing because Thor Nystrom has joined our family. An incredible follow over on Twitter. Please go check out Thor's work with us over here on the betting pro side of things. Very excited to have Thor now part of our extended Fantasy Pros family. And today, we're going to continue to give you great fantasy football content because today we're going to talk about running backs and quarterbacks and breakout candidates and what that really means. And everyone has a different definition, if you will, about what a breakout is. But today we're going to examine some of the tiers that we have over at fantasypros.com and our rankings. So if you go to fantasypros.com/rankings, ironically enough, as I mentioned, you can see all the different tiers. And it's very important because that helps you shape your draft strategy and also helps you identify guys that might be able to jump a tier. So in terms of breakout, I think that's what we're going to try to accomplish today. And speaking of accomplishing things, you can actually do very little and accomplish getting a CeeDee Lamb jersey autographed in your hands. And all you got to do is go to fantasypros.com/contest to get involved with it. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, great. You can already go enter. If you haven't, I'm asking you what kind of choices you've made with your life. And you should go and right now immediately subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got incredible videos dropping every single day. Every podcast is on there. The short form, the long form, the TikTok dances that Andrew Erickson likes to do. It's all on the YouTube channel. So go check it out. Subscribe, click that little bell for notifications, and then head over and go to fantasypros.com/contest so you can get involved in that CeeDee Lamb jersey autographed, by the way, by CeeDee Lamb himself. And that's thanks to our friends at pristineauction.com. So go get that. And I know you can't get enough Fantasy Pros. You can't get enough Andrew Erickson or Matthew Freedman, and maybe some of me as well. At fantasypros.com/chat, you can interact with us. That is our Discord channel. It is fantastic. It's growing every single year that we've got it. And the community is it's second to none. It's a fantastic group of people. They welcomed me back. They asked how my vacation was, people in my AMA channel. But the thing is, it's not just about the interaction. It's not just about finding leagues. It's about getting advice, interacting with us. And you could do that when you're a premium member of Fantasy Pros. So your premium membership goes a very long way with all of our tools at Fantasy Pros, not to mention the fact that you're also going to have access to things like Discord, like Stages, like our AMA channels, where you can basically literally talk to us about your team and we can get you the best answers we can. Far less impersonal than Twitter. It's fantastic. It's what you want to be at. And again, that's at fantasypros.com/chat. Check it out for free. And then, of course, upgrade. Now, enough of that. let's get to some football. What do you say? It's July 5th, like Freedman said. So let's get on it. And let's start here with the first tier of running backs we're going to discuss. Now, this first tier, we're going to call it tier 2. And again, if you go to fantasypros.com/rankings, you can see all the names we're talking about. In tier 2, in our consensus ranks at Fantasy Pros, you're going to see names like Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Najee Harris, Joe Mixon, DeAndre Swift. So Andrew Erickson, since you had so much fun without me, I want to put you to work right away. You tell me, looking at this tier right now, who do you think can jump this tier back into the top 3 grouping? Who do you think might be able to surprise people and get to that level as well from this tier of already pretty accomplished running backs?
So for me, it's pretty easy. It's Dalvin Cook, who is the number 4 ranked running back in the top of tier 2. And I guess my question to the way the tiers are arranged is, why is he not in tier 1? Okay, what's different about Dalvin Cook than last year? Last year he was the consensus number 2 pick behind Christian McCaffrey. So what's changed? Okay, we're talking about he's another year older, maybe coming off a season where he wasn't as efficient as he's been in years past. He didn't score as many touchdowns, but we know that touchdowns are fluky year to year. From 2019 to 2020, Cook was averaging 16 touchdowns. He scored 6 last year. So, I mean, if I'm a betting man, I'm going to bet that he probably gets back up near at least double-digit touchdowns, which is going to help him get back into the top 3 conversation. Last year, he was top 5 in terms of touches per game at 22. He always misses a couple games here and there, but that's to be expected. A lot of these running backs at the top are going to miss some games at some point. So, and an offense that's talking a lot about using him more in the passing game, and if his efficiency is starting to come down as a rusher, then we're going to see him make up points as a receiver out of the backfield. I think that Cook is still the clear number 1 running back in this backfield, even with Alexander Mattison flashing at his opportunities. But for me, I just don't really see why we're going away from Cook after a year where he just didn't. Is it just the touchdowns? Like, is that why Eckler is ranked ahead of Dalvin Cook? Because Eckler just scored more touchdowns last year? I mean, this Vikings offense is exciting. Like, I really want a lot of parts of this Minnesota passing attack, which is going to include, by all indications, include Dalvin Cook. So I think that Cook is really the guy for me here. And it's weird to kind of even talk about him as a tier jumper, because I just think that he should be in the top tier already.
All right. Well, I tend to agree with you, Erickson. Freedman, when it comes to Dalvin Cook, why do you think he's not in that elite tier right now? I know he's right outside of it, so we're kind of splitting hairs, but do you think it's just a matter of fatigue and we take this guy for granted?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of all of the things that Erickson mentioned there. Joe, you mentioned the fatigue. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe some of it is that Alexander Mattison looked just as good as Dalvin Cook last year when he was given the opportunity to be the lead back. And now we have a new coaching staff, and we don't know really how they're going to apportion carries in that backfield. So although we have seen Dalvin Cook, when he's been given the full workload, be a top 3 running back, there is no guarantee this year that he actually will be like the full-on lead back the way that he has been previously. Like, what if Alexander Mattison comes in and takes 30% of those opportunities that used to go to Dalvin Cook? So I think it's the uncertainty of the situation with the new coaching staff that is giving people pause.
All right. So Freedman, who in tier 2 for you do you think might be a tier jumper, a breakout guy?
Joe, I'm going to quibble a little bit with the format of the show. Probably not a surprise. Aren't you back? Aren't you back from vacation? This is what you're going to get.
I am.
Okay?
This is why we only get together once every 6 weeks, because it's always a quibble.
It should have been 8 weeks per the contract. Breakouts. Come on. Breakouts are guys who haven't done it yet. And so all of the other guys in this tier, the guys you mentioned, they have done it except for DeAndre Swift. So that's the guy I'm going with basically by default. And it's not as if he's been bad. He just hasn't had the full-on stud breakout that some of these other guys have had. But I think it happens this year if he stays healthy. The Lions should be better on offense without Anthony Lynn calling plays. Some, addition by subtraction there. They actually have a pretty good offensive line, and Swift is one of the rare backs with a true 3-down skill set. He had 78 targets last year. Almost all of the guys ranked ahead of him are older and could be entering the drop-off phase of their careers, but Swift is still ascending and his team is still ascending. So I really like the upside case for him, along with the high floor that accompanies his pass catching ability.
Now, part of this draft season is always the same thing. Like we come in with certain predisposed notions about players, and then as we have more discussions, we sometimes evolve, whether it be positively or negatively about these players. Swift is a guy that I wasn't particularly on coming into this season. And the more we've sat and chatted on all these shows, and the more research you start to do and really dive into things, I'm starting to come around on this. And Erickson, I know you, somebody who's been very pro DeAndre Swift here. You were kind of mad that Freedman got to the show sheet before you and picked him. So that's really on you, buddy. But at the same time, Swift has been somebody you from the get-go have been very much on. Now, I love last year, you didn't see a lot of carry volume in a lot of particular games. We did have some explosive games. Is that what you keep coming back to is, if we could just stay on the field, if we can get 16, 17 games out of him, all of a sudden he becomes this giant tier jumper? Or is there something else there in this offense that's not holding you back that you think is actually going to improve this year?
Well, I feel good about his floor because I know he's good. Like, I know that Swift is a really good running back. He's good in space. And I mean, the worst part of his game is him rushing in between the tackles, which you don't get fantasy points for anyway. So it doesn't necessarily really matter that his greatest weakness is something that we don't even necessarily need to account for fantasy purposes. Now, the big thing with Swift is we got to get the touchdowns. Like, that's what we need from him. And it's interesting enough, I look at Swift's profile this year and it reminds me a lot of Austin Eckler's last year. The big question with Eckler was like, right, we know some Chargers running back is going to split carries with him because of his size. And is he going to get the red zone usage? And what was the common denominator between, Eckler last year and Swift this year? Oh, Austin Eckler was coached under Anthony Lynn previously. And then when Lynn left the Chargers organization, what do you know? They gave Austin Eckler the second most red zone touches in the NFL. And now Anthony Lynn is leaving the Lions. This should give an opportunity for DeAndre Swift as Dan Cable's featured and best player on offense. I mean, don't forget, once they took away the play calling from Lynn, Swift had 33 carries in that next game. Now, part of it was due to the game script, the way that things played out, but just the confidence that Campbell showed in going to his best player when it's like, we want to win this freaking game. Like, we're giving the ball to Swift as many times as humanly possible. I feel like that's not going to be different outside the red zone. He had 26 red zone touches last year, which was outside the top 30. So there's room to go with touchdowns. There's room to grow with it. And that's kind of where I settle on Swift, because I think we're going to be talking about him next year like we're talking about Eckler this year. Like, we're ranking Eckler as a top 5 running back because he scored 20 touchdowns last year. Now, 20 is probably aggressive for a Lions offense, but you look up and down that roster. Freedman talked about the offensive line. Jared Goff is a check down quarterback, so he will throw the ball to the running back, and they added weapons. They added Chark, Jameson Williams. So I think that this Lions has a chance to maybe flirt with back end top 10 in terms of points and yards. They play in a dome. I think it's wheels up all around.
The one difference is Jared Goff is not Justin Herbert. I just want to point that out there. And I know you can't get analysis like that anywhere else but Fantasy Pros. That's why you come back to the show over and over again. But it is true. A lot of that is on the quarterback as well. So I think that's what keeps hanging me up is the Jared Goff running the offense situation. But I am starting to buy in. I'm starting to come around. I even moved him up in my rankings today. So you guys are winning. All right, let's go to tier 3 here. We have Nick Chubb at 9, Aaron Jones at 10, Leonard Fournette at 11, then Alvin Kamara, Javonte Williams, Saquon Barkley, and James Conner. So Freedman, we'll start with you on this one. In tier 3, is there a running back to you that jumps out at you that you think is ready to jump a tier?
Jump a tier? Yes. Aaron Jones. Breakout? No, because Aaron Jones is already broken out. But
I see what you're doing here. I see the theme of the show here today.
Yes.
So you've laid it out pretty clear.
Yeah. What no one ever tells you is that sometimes beating a dead horse is fun.
Oh, it's great.
Yes.
It's great. The horse is basically glue at this point, but that's fine.
Yes. Aaron Jones. I think he is a tier jumper in that I have him ranked a tier ahead of where he is right now. He's one of those running backs that I highlight in my perfect draft plan as someone I'm very happy to get in round 2. Other guys here too, Fournette, Barkley, James Conner, I think they are good in the running back dead zone. But man, Aaron Jones, he really belongs in tier 2, the tier we just talked about. I have him at RB7. That's 3 spots ahead of ECR, 5 spots ahead of the ADP at the position that you can check out at Fantasy Pros. I think he crushes. In our NFL draft kit, I do have my article for players that I am targeting. And Jones is one of my top targets this year. Last year, Devontae Adams, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, they collectively accounted for 224 targets for the Packers in the regular season. And, Adams is gone. Valdez-Scantling is gone. The Packers, I think, are going to lean more on the running game. I think that benefits Jones. And they're also, I'm imagining, going to reallocate a portion of the available targets to Jones. So, look at the wide receivers they have there. Sammy Watkins is maybe someone who's vying to be the number 1 wide receiver there.
Careful
Christian
what you say.
Watson,
People listen to this.
Alan Lazard.
Okay.
It's not a good group. Let's just say that.
That's fair.
And some of the targets that in a normal offense would go to wide receivers, I think those end up going to Jones, who, as weird as this might sound, I think he has the best mix of pass catching talent and rapport with Aaron Rodgers out of any of the pass catchers left in Green Bay. Since 2018, he's averaged 6.7 targets in 7 games without Adams, 5.2 targets in 9 games without Valdez-Scantling. And, now both of those guys are gone. He really could challenge for, if not for Christian McCaffrey, who knows with his health, if not for Austin Eckler, Aaron Jones might be the guy who ends up leading the position in running back targets. So I think he has an incredibly high floor with the increased target volume and also his established scoring prowess, 49 touchdowns in 57 games since 2018. I am incredibly high on Jones relative to the expert and ADP consensus. That means I am getting a lot of him in my drafts, and I'm very happy to have that.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that you're happy. It makes all of us happy when you're happy. Andrew Erickson, the case has been made for Aaron Jones. Is there a running back in tier 3 that you'd like to make a case for?
I'm going to make the case for Saquon Barkley, who broke out as a rookie, but that seemed like it was eons ago because it has not happened since. He's not able to repeat his amazing efforts since that season because of the way the Giants have been set up in terms of offensive supporting cast around him and because of just injuries. Like Barkley just has been banged up, whether it's been ACL injuries or these freak ankle injuries. It just hasn't been the case for Saquon Barkley to really be a top fantasy running back. But I mean, heading into this year, I almost kind of ranked Saquon Barkley just kind of under the impression that he was already hurt. He was coming back from an injury. The situation was horrible already. And I was like, wait, this isn't the reality anymore. Like he's like not rehabbing from an injury. So like check. New coaching staff. All right. These people know what they're doing in the building. I like that. Brian Dable coming over from the Bills. Okay. Improved offensive line. They got great guys in the draft. I thought they did a great job overall in the NFL draft. So I think there's reason to buy back into Barkley because of some of the reasons I just listed out. And during last year, when we saw him, when he had the full workload and he was healthy, he was a small sample size, but he was averaging 23 points per game in his 2 healthy starts before that Cowboys game, before he tripped over some guy and destroyed his ankle. And we were like, come on, like, can this guy get a break here? And I think it's a reminder that these freak injuries aren't necessarily the things that you need to remember. I remember Keenan Allen was injury prone because he had this lacerated kidney or some type of weird after he come off a season where he had a torn ACL. And then, what has Keenan Allen done since then? Just put up 1,000 yards, 100 catches every single season, just because those injuries weren't really predictive. They just were more telling us what happened the previous year. And what happened the previous year with Barkley was he was dealing with an injury entering the season. He finally came back, was healthy, looked good, and then he got hurt again. And then the Giants offense was terrible, as it's always been the past couple of years. So he's still just 25 years old. We know he has a receiving profile to his game. And I think the biggest thing with Barkley was the Giants didn't add anyone else to this backfield that I thought they were going to. They were a team that visited a lot of draft picks of rookie running backs, and they drafted really no one of consequence. Matt Breida is the backup, and Matt Breida got like one chance to play last year under Dable, and then it's like, nah, like you're going back to the bench. We're going back to Zach Moss. So I really think Barkley is a player, one of the rare running backs that we're looking at in a contract year. The Giants have every reason to use him and run him to the ground if they want to extend him, and he's someone that could flirt with that 90% snap share, which is just really rare to find with running backs these days. So that's why I think Barkley can really get back into the conversation of elite running back in 2022.
All right, so Jones and Barkley are the guys in tier 3. Tier 4, we're starting to get a little deeper into the pool. So we have David Montgomery in tier 4 starting at number 16, then Ezekiel Elliott in the consensus at 17, then Cam Akers, Antonio Gibson, Breece Hall at 20, J.K. Dobbins, Josh Jacobs, Travis Etienne Jr., Elijah Mitchell, and A.J. Dillon. So Andrew, let's flip around here. Let's get you here first in tier 4. Of these running backs, who is it that sticks out to you that you think can break out of tier 4 and maybe get all the way up to tier 3, 2, or who knows, maybe even higher, depending on what your vision is?
So this running back has not broken out yet, so he actually kind of fits the actual criteria for what we're looking.
That'll make Matthew very happy.
For me, it's Rams running back Cam Akers, who I've been very high on during the offseason process. And I just kind of want to relate it to not even the fact that I think that he is like the bell cow for the Rams every time he's really been healthy. They've always gone back to him. Sean McVay's gone back to him as the red zone guy, as the running back they've used on all 3 downs. And I mean, they were begging him to come back off a torn Achilles to get Darrell Henderson off the freaking field. So for me, I don't think that that's really up for debate whether, is Akers going to get the workload? I think that he does. And now kind of attaching the workload to what his fantasy upside can be in this Rams offense, I think he has a real chance to get double-digit touchdowns. You look at Henderson and Sony Michel last year, they combined for the second most red zone touches among all running backs last season, and they had the lowest rushing touchdown rate of any team. They ranked top 8 in that category the last 3 seasons prior. Now, part of that is because Sean McVay was terrified of letting Jared Goff throw the ball in the red zone, which they were obviously more open to do with Matthew Stafford. But that's just a sign of natural regression is coming. Like, they're going to throw less passing touchdowns. Cooper Kupp, it's really hard for him to repeat what he did last year because it's really hard to catch 18 plus touchdowns every single season. It's not very easy to do. So we're going to see more rushing touchdowns. And who is that going to benefit? Mr. 1, Cam Akers. So that's why I'm really high on Akers. He's fully healthy entering the season, and people just can't knock the fact the guy averaged 2.4 yards per carry against a juggernaut of rush defenses when all the Rams running backs were doing horrible running the football. He wasn't supposed to come back at all. I really wonder if he had not come back at all, would he be actually higher ranked? So for me, it's still Cam Akers.
Well, let's ask that question. Matthew Freedman, did Akers do his fantasy stock a disservice by coming back and trying to push through and be a football player and play maybe sooner than he should have? And when you add in that push where he probably was not 100%, on to the fact that he was also had 2 seasons where he's been injured and missed a lot of time. He was a rookie in one, and there's this growing narrative that Sean McVay likes to use different running backs. Well, does he? Because I remember one guy named Todd Gurley who he used a lot, and he was perfectly happy using one if it's the right one. I guess the question is Cam Akers the right one in your opinion in this offense that already last year was very good? Can Cam Akers be a breakout guy?
Joe, I think you asked like 5 questions right there. I'm going to try to answer one of them.
Well,
maybe.
A professional would answer all 5. So
I'm not a professional. We all know that. I pretend to be one in meetings, but we all know I'm not.
To be one in meetings. That is farthest from the truth. Anybody who's been in a meeting with Freedman is hilarious. But go ahead, continue, my friend.
All right. So Cam Akers, I think his draft stock is about where it would have been because you have the kind of the plus and the minus. When he returned, like it showed that he's some sort of superhuman, like Adrian Peterson-esque superhuman to return that early from that kind of injury. And the workload that he got when he returned was a very strong indicator that he is going to be the lead back this year. The thing is, as you mentioned, he looked horrible. And there can be a lot of reasons as to why that was the case. But I think, Occam's razor, the most obvious explanation is he was coming back from an Achilles injury, and that has been an injury that destroys careers. And even though Akers is probably the intended lead back this year, I can't help but shake the fact that he looked bad in the playoffs and that we know this is an injury that has just absolutely devastated running backs, specifically running backs, and they've never really looked the same. Deontay Foreman, like last year, he finally sort of looked like himself. It took him 4 years to get there after recovering from his Achilles. And so Cam Akers, this is probably the right draft range. I could see how he has a really good season, volume fueled, and maybe Akers is that athletic marvel who can come back from this injury, a year after suffering it and be the athletic version he was previously. But I'm just kind of skeptical.
That's fair. I think this is very good because we have 2 sides of this coin where you're talking about the injury and being realistic. At the same time, Andrew's talking about the offense and what it potentially might offer, and that is so important. We keep talking about these offensive ecosystems and keep talking about wanting to invest in good offenses. So Cam Akers is one of those guys where you see all the potential, but maybe we should consider a little bit more of the fallout as well. And that's probably baked into that ECR of where he is right now, because currently he is at 18. That feels about right. Here's one quick question, just one. Who is the perfect kind of running back you would want to pair with Cam Akers, Freedman, if you had your druthers, right? If you had one guy, you say, I feel really good about this back, who do you want to put Cam Akers with to kind of offset that risk?
Well, I would probably not want to have a 0 RB strategy and have like Cam Akers as my number one running back and then have to rely on dead zone running backs to add depth. So it would be, kind of a hero RB approach where I would hope to be able to get Jonathan Taylor or Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, to get one of those premium backs in the first round. And then maybe I'm able to grab Cam Akers later because, as you mentioned, he's in a great offense. He has the volume coming his direction, the way that Erickson mentioned. Like, you could see a clear path to him being a top 10 back if everything works out for him. But I would want to stabilize with the stud running back up top.
All right. Good to know. All right. Give me your name, Freedman, on this list in this tier that you think is ready to jump a tier and break out.
All right. So my name is Travis Etienne, but kind of like almost exact circumstances to Cam Akers. Like, Akers has great situation around him in the offense. Travis Etienne, we don't know what that offense is really going to look like. We know it looked really bad last year, but like Akers, he's coming back from an injury. But in my thinking, Akers, because of the injury he suffered, has a limited ceiling. He has kind of like a higher ceiling relative to his floor, but he's probably not going to be a top 3 back. I could see Travis Etienne, if things work perfectly, actually being a top 3, a top 5 back. And you just kind of look at the talent that he had when he was entering the league. He's got that first round draft capital. He's got a 3-down skill set. He had 588 yards receiving in his final season at Clemson. He might be one of the best receiving backs in the league his first game. He's got that kind of ability. And the important thing is that running back James Robinson, as great as he was in his first 2 years, he has the Achilles injury that he suffered in December, season-ending injury for sure, potentially career-altering injury. And very good chance will not be healthy for week 1, maybe the first half of the season. But even if he is, given how devastating that injury is, I think Travis Etienne could come in right away and be the lead back. And if that offense takes a step forward, which it definitely should, given that there's no Urban Meyer to drag it down, if we see the maturation of quarterback Trevor Lawrence, one of the greatest NFL prospects at the position that we've seen, if that offense takes a step forward, and if Travis Etienne is healthy coming off of the injury, which all indications are that he is, and if he lives up to his draft capital, he could blow his ADP out of the water.
Now, Travis Etienne was one of my favorite guys heading into last year. I am just copying and pasting all of my feelings about him from last year into this year. And it's because of what I saw in Clemson. It's because of that comfortability and with Trevor Lawrence. Some people say, well, you can put too much stock in that. I disagree. I think anybody who played the game knows you can rely on certain people and you speak the same language, and there's those unspoken bonds when you're out there on the field and where a guy's going to be and what's going on. And again, it's going to take time to transfer that to the NFL level. But Erickson last year, Etienne was a guy that I had on any draft between mid-July and early August. He was on those teams, and boy, I was loving life. And then the injury happened. I want to say it was right after the flex draft. I think it was like 24 hours after, and then I was misery after that. But can we just go back and hit rewind and reset on Travis Etienne this year, especially in the circumstances like Freedman said, where we have at least theoretically a capable NFL coach at the helm?
I think so. I think that Etienne's skill set, Freedman hit on the receiving, is a really big thing with him where, he's going to be on the field when the Jaguars are trailing in games. And that's something that's probably going to continue to happen to Jacksonville as they start to kind of put the pieces together. And that's how you get a ton of fantasy points. I think it's important too to kind of compare Etienne to an Akers, where Akers his floor is supplemented because of the offense he plays in. Like, he's on the Rams offense. Like, it's really hard for Akers, if he's healthy, for him to be bad because he's on the Rams. But Etienne has the ability to be like the guy that gets all the touchdowns on Jacksonville, to be the best player on the Jaguars offense. Like, that's not going to happen with Akers as long as Cooper Kupp is on the field. Like, that's just the reality of the situation, where Jacksonville can be like, we're going to make our offense around our dynamic first round running back, and then everything else kind of falls into place. We still have to see Trevor Lawrence gel with a lot of these new pass catchers, like a Christian Kirk, like an Evan Ingram. Like, the only other receiver that's coming back from last year, or that is going to be a starter, is Marvin Jones, who's over 31 years old. But Travis Etienne, if you just look at who he's completed the most passes to in his football career, it's Travis Etienne. He hasn't even played in the NFL yet. So I think that I like chasing the upside with Etienne, and I think that a good exercise and litmus test is to kind of think about, all right, where are we going to be drafting Etienne next year? Like, do you think he's going to be in the dead zone next year, or do you think he's going to be in the top 2 rounds? And
No.
I think I would lean towards him probably being a top 2 round pick next year.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's get to that next tier here. You teased the dead zone before. Well, here we go. Let's get at it. Tier 5, 26, Miles Sanders, 27, Damian Harris. Now, I still like Harris more than most people, but look, you got Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you got Kareem Hunt, Tony Pollard at 30, Chase Edmonds, Devin Singletary, Rashad Penny, Melvin Gordon the third, Ken Walker the third, Cordarrelle Patterson the fourth, and Rhamondre Stevenson the fifth, all here. Those last 2, I can't necessarily confirm that they have those numbers at the end of their names, but let's go back to you, Erickson. Is there somebody from this tier that you think in tier 5 that can kind of break out and jump a big tier or maybe even 2 this year?
Well, it was going to be Miles Sanders before he told everyone not to draft him in fantasy football. So I'm not going to go with Miles Sanders. I'm going to go with Devin Singletary for the Buffalo Bills. I like the fact that the market is not reacting enough to Singletary and what he did at the end of last year, RB3 and PPR scoring over the final 6 weeks of the season, averaging 17 fantasy points per game, despite the fact that the Bills were maintaining a pass-first approach. Like, they didn't just like open up the running game for Singletary. They were still throwing the ball a lot. And Singletary is not known for his pass catching. That's really kind of what's holding him back, and the fact that the Bills drafted James Cook. But all the rhetoric out of Bills camp is that Singletary is still the starting running back for the Buffalo Bills, which I believe it makes sense. Like, why else would they bring him back? Or he's on a expiring contract this year, and he was good at last year. He was good at the end of the year prior. So we've seen this running back in a very high-powered offense have spurts of bell cow usage, and he's been efficient. Like, people will just ignore the fact that Devin Singletary is PFF's 4th highest ranked running back on rushes of 15 plus yards, 7th ranked in terms of forced missed tackles since 2021. I mean, he really checks off a lot of boxes of the kind of that breakout running back coming from an ambiguous backfield. You know, him and James Cook, depending on where you look, their ADPs are right next to each other. So I know I came out of the gates really aggressive on James Cook, you know, assuming he was going to take it over. And then I just kind of thought back. It's like, you know what? I mean, I would not have felt this strongly about James Cook, or I would not have felt this strongly about JD McKissick, specifically if he had signed with the Bills. So what if McKissick is just going to be in James Cook's role, basically, or kind of vice versa? So I kind of, you know, came down off my stance on Cook. I was basically just blinded by the draft capital, essentially. And I was like, wait a minute, like, Singletary balled out at the end of last year. He's still there. And James Cook still hasn't played in the NFL yet. And he's a undersized back, similar to Devin Singletary. So I think it's still Singletary's backfield to at least start the year. And I want guys on good offenses. So Devin Singletary, to me, is someone that we could definitely see taking a step forward if he continues to roll over the production. And right now, where you can draft him, like, he's not in the dead zone. He's outside. Like, he's looking with his binoculars at the dead zone running backs, being like, oh, there they are. So outside the top 100 picks, Devin Singletary is definitely one of my most owned running backs in terms of drafts now, especially when I draft one guy and wait at the position.
Now, he's one of mine too. So I want to see if we make this 3 for 3. This was a player last year, Freedman, that Singletary really carried a lot of teams into the playoffs and then successfully through them. How much stock do you put in that, what you saw last year, and how much stock are you putting into James Cook being there now?
I prefer James Cook. Sorry, guys.
Well, this is why you watch the show.
Yeah.
See, it's one thing to listen to the show. Now, the entire time that he's talking about Singletary, Freedman is smirking. And I feel like as he was checking all the boxes, Erickson, Freedman had his eraser out and he wanted to erase all the boxes. So tell me why that you're on the other side of Cook. I know he's very fast. I know he's very exciting, but why do you think it's going to hinder what you saw last year from Singletary?
All right. Well, I have Cook as my RB33, and it's an upside ranking, like aggressive ranking. Cook doesn't have the size of a lead back, but neither did someone like Jamal Charles. You know, I know, like, it might be ridiculous to compare Cook to Charles, but like physically they were pretty comparable. I think we know what Devin Singletary is. Like, he's a small back who is better at running than you would think for a guy of his size. But he's not that great of a receiver. Cook is a significantly better receiver. He's got way more draft capital than JD McKissick ever had. And I think more draft capital than you would have equated to the salary that they were going to pay JD McKissick. So I don't think it's a straight 1-for-1 comparison of Cook is in the McKissick role. I think that's his floor. I think he has like McKissick plus capability. And that's the role that he's entering into now in an offense that is very pass heavy, one of the best offenses in the league. And if he's a better runner than they expect him to be, or that we, tentatively right now think that he is, then I think he's a 3-down back. Like he's got that upside. It's a stretch maybe, but it's within the range of outcomes. And even if the worst case scenario is he's a receiving back in a really good offense, and if Singletary gets injured, then he's a total smash. I still like that at his ADP. Singletary, I think, is a maybe high floor but low ceiling kind of player, given that Cook is now on the roster. And so that's just not the kind of player that I want in this range.
All right. Give me another player you think you do want in this range at tier 5.
Rhamondre Stevenson. And I will say I am blatantly appealing to your Patriots homerism.
Well, you've come to the right place, my friend.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I put it aside better than this guy, I think. I know I really like to put it aside, but talk to me about Stevenson. Tell me why you're excited about him.
Yeah, he's a natural handcuff to Damian Harris. So there's massive upside if Harris misses time. We saw him go off in a couple of games last year when he got heavy usage. Also, he already has a built-in role as a change of pace guy. So it's not as if he's Alexander Madison where, he gives you nothing if he's not starting. Stevenson is likely to have a role even if Harris is active. And James White could open the year on the PUP. And so he's still recovering from a significant hip injury. Stevenson could open the year as the pass catching back for the team, especially now that Brandon Bolden is gone following former offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels to Denver. So we're talking about a big back who has pass catching capability, good athleticism. He flashed production last year. He's entering his second season in an offense that could continue to lean on the running game and might take a step forward with the development of second-year quarterback Mac Jones. So I think Stevenson has a nice blend of upside and an elevated floor.
Question for you. When you come down to the fact that the Patriots never give second contracts to running backs typically, like that's just not their MO. Does that concern you at all that they are going to overly use Harris potentially, and that could stunt a little bit of the upside that you see game by game for Stevenson, and it might take an injury to unlock Stevenson's full potential?
Maybe, but I think if Stevenson is the better runner, he's just going to start to get more usage than Damian Harris anyway. And we all know that he's the better receiver out of the two at this point. And so for them to have the ability of having a 3-down back, think of LeGarrette Blount had been a good receiver, how much usage he might have gotten. We actually might have that within the range of outcomes with Rhamondre Stevenson.
All right. So those are the running backs we have to jump some tiers potentially and break out from one tier to another. Let's switch gears here. And later in the show, we're going to talk about some of your questions that we have in our listener mailbag, which is great. We got a lot of responses today, and I can only assume it's because Freedman was on the show. So everybody wants to get their questions answered by the boss. But in the meantime, before we get to that, let's talk a little quarterbacks. And let's start with tier 2, who can jump from tier 2 into that super elite tier 1. The names on the list in tier 2, again, you can see all these at fantasypros.com/rankings. That's where you can go to get all of these here. You got Kyler Murray at 5 right now, which makes me very uncomfortable. I'm sorry, it just does. Jalen Hurts at 6, Joe Burrow at 7, Tom Brady at 8. No respect for Tom Brady, none. Hopefully someday that kid will break out and have a good year. Dak Prescott at 9, Russell Wilson at 10, and then Matthew Stafford at 11. So Andrew Erickson, when you're looking at this second tier of quarterbacks, is there somebody you think is ready to break out into the, elite, super elite tier potentially?
For me, it's Kyler Murray, because I think that he's already shown that he could be an elite quarterback. And I know you said here you're uncomfortable with him at 5. Is that because it's too high? I'm
uncomfortable for a few reasons. Number one, his best asset is Hopkins, who, 6 weeks is a long time in fantasy football. It's a long time. It's, almost half the season. And the other problem I have is the size of Kyler Murray and the style of play, where 2 years ago, where he got fallen upon, and for 4 weeks, he couldn't throw the ball more than 10, 15 yards because his shoulder was hurting him. And then last year, missing time because of the size and style of play. That combination to me is a problem. I'm not saying he can't overcome it, but then when you factor in Cliff Kingsbury's bad play calling, when you factor in that Hopkins may or may not return as the Hopkins we know and love, there's a lot here to unpack that it just makes me uncomfortable having him that high. And I was somebody who was in on Kyler Murray last year, and then the second year of more injuries and more of the physical limitations started to really become more apparent. And I stopped looking at the rose-colored glasses of what he could be. and started realizing a little bit more physically what he is. That's why I'm uncomfortable.
Well, I guess I'll disagree with you with his best asset being Hopkins, because I believe his best asset is his legs with
That's
him
nice.
running across. Because if
there.
you look at how he did without Hopkins at the end of last season, in those 4 games, he was running more. He had more rushing yards per game. So he was at 26 with DeAndre Hopkins in the 10 games. He was up to 39 rushing yards per game. So yeah, there's a little bit of noise to it. It's a small sample size, but it's not crazy to think that without his number 1 wide receiver that he's going to take off and run more. That just makes sense intuitively. And there are numbers that, also match it. So that would kind of be my argument to the side of, okay, he's out. And I really think that that's kind of why he's being ranked this way, because people are definitely including the fact that Hopkins is going to miss the first 6 weeks. But last year, even Kyler Murray delivered the highest QB1 hit rate of any quarterback last year. No one finished at a higher top 12 rate than Kyler Murray did. And he was the only quarterback besides Tom Brady that finished top 3 in 20% or more of his games. And he's the only other quarterback like Brady going outside the top 5 in terms of ADP, not necessarily ECR. So for me, I look at Murray as a quarterback that can be the QB1 overall easily. And it's not even, he doesn't necessarily even need Hopkins to get it done. I mean, who were Lamar Jackson's wide receivers when he was the QB1 overall? It was Mark Andrews. It was Marquise Brown as a rookie. Yeah. I just think that the rushing is still there for him. And when Murray is at his healthiest, that's when he runs. Over the first half of the last 2 seasons he's played, QB1 and QB3 respectively, over the first half of the last 2 seasons. That's when the Cardinals have won their most games, and it's when Kyler Murray's been the healthiest he's been. So if you want to sell off Kyler Murray when Hopkins comes back as, oh, he's going to continue his production because you're concerned about the injuries, then I'm all for that type of strategy. But for us to look at Kyler Murray and the obsession with rushing quarterbacks and to say, oh yeah, like he can't even be like a top 5 guy. I mean, I just think that's wrong.
All right. Well, I mean, the yards per carry did go down a little bit year over year too, and I think that's something to certainly look at when it comes to Kyler Murray. How do you feel about Murray this year, Freedman?
I'm with Erickson. I mean, he could be the number 1 overall guy. I think Josh Allen is the clear number 1 quarterback in terms of how you would draft them. But after Allen, I think you can make pretty compelling cases for Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, or Kyler Murray, anywhere from like the number 2 to number 3 guy who should go off the board. And Murray, I think he has probably the best combination of any of these top tier quarterbacks in terms of passing ability and rushing ability, which gives him an incredibly high weekly floor, as Erickson mentioned. He's basically a locked in QB1, sort of like top 12 quarterback anytime he's on the field. So I think he's a pretty safe pick relative to the other guys at the position. But that said, we're in this ADP range where I'm probably not all that desirous to draft a quarterback anyway. So, I like Kyler Murray. I can see how he's the number 1 quarterback at the end of the season. If he stays healthy, everything goes well with the weapons he has around him, but I'm probably also not drafting him.
All right. Is there somebody in this tier that you think is worthy of that sort of potential?
Maybe I draft Jalen Hurts. And it has to do with the fact that, out of the quarterbacks in the top 6, he almost always is the 6th guy available. But I think out of those guys, he still has the ability to finish as a top 3 player at the position. And so given the cost and the upside, he is the quarterback that I would draft in this range if I were to draft a quarterback. That said, I would probably still rather wait, but the Eagles have one of the best offensive lines in the league, maybe the best line. Hurts is entering his 2nd year in the same offensive system. He hasn't had that benefit for a number of years. I think that continuity is going to be really important for his development. He has the dual threat capability. He's improved as a player every year of his career going back to college. And now he has A.J. Brown to go alongside Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. So if you are going quarterback early, I think Hurts is the guy to draft.
All right, let's go quarterback a little later. In tier 3, you get Aaron Rodgers at 12, Trey Lance at 13, Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, Tua Tagovailoa, and Trevor Lawrence, who from this tier can jump from that fringe QB1 to maybe tier 2 or even above.
I love Trey Lance. This is the guy. Like, he's the quarterback for my perfect draft plan. ECR of QB 13, ADP of QB 14. I have him as my QB 8. Like, it's an aggressive way of ranking him, But if he is the week 1 starter, which I think it's likelier than not that he is the week 1 starter, if he's the week 1 starter, I think he just provides so much value. I think there's a real chance that what Patrick Mahomes was in 2018 and Lamar Jackson in 2019 and Josh Allen in 2020 and Jalen Hurts last year, like the type of late round quarterback that you want to go after, I think really that is what Trey Lance could be this year, because he's got the rushing ability. We saw that last year. We saw it in his college production. He's got the rushing ability. He's got the strong arm. He's got the smart offensive play caller to scheme players open for him. That is, I think, really the big component of this, is that he's got a guy who could craft a system for him. I mean, regardless of whatever you think about Shanahan as someone who evaluates talent, as a scheme coordinator, he's great. I would say easily top 3, maybe the number 1 overall guy. And he's got the playmakers in that system who can help create production for him. He's got Debo, Ayuk, Kittle. Those are 3 of the best after the catch producers at their position in the league. And so if he can just, with the created, schemed open plays, hit those guys in stride, and then they can create a lot of production for him, he could have production that like we aren't even close to anticipating. So I think there's a world of upside with him and a really high floor because of the rushing ability. So Trey Lance, I want as much of him as I can get.
And you see, I'm kind of where you are. I will take Josh Allen if he falls a little bit further than he should. But then after that, I'd much rather take Lance or take another shot at somebody else. And then I'll take a safe backup quarterback that I know is, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, those guys. I love that strategy this year. To me, that's the perfect way to go and attack it. One question: why haven't we heard Trey Lance is the starter and it's July 5th? What's holding things up in San Francisco?
They basically have said it without saying it.
I want them to actually say it. It would be nice.
Shanahan has said that they really intend to trade Jimmy Garoppolo. They can't trade him yet because of the shoulder surgery. Everything that they've said is, Trey Lance, we've got this quarterback coach that we think works really well with Trey Lance. Like, they are heading in that direction. I do think, and this goes a little bit against what I just laid out, I do think that if, best laid plans don't work out, no one wants Jimmy Garoppolo, and Garoppolo actually is on the roster come week 1, they are going to have to think pretty hard about, do we go with the guy who, when healthy, has quarterbacked us in the last 2 years, or like his last 2 full seasons, to a Super Bowl and the conference championship, who
it's a real question.
Is still more prepared. Do we go with him or do we go with the rookie?
Well, that's the problem, is sometimes real football ruins what we want to happen in fantasy, but we don't think about it enough. I wish we did. It's one of the things I think is grossly under-discussed and underappreciated in our community, is let's talk real football a little bit more sometimes. And yeah, I want Trey Lance just as much as Freedman does, if not more. He was my number 2 quarterback in that class last year. I love that dude. I was so excited for him to get there. And then Jimmy Garoppolo took him to another championship game, and I went, oh God, this is really getting frustrating for me. But it is tough, man. It's tough not to see that playing out. And I think you might get that playing out, and that's going to make me very sad. Just inside, it's just very sad. All right, make me happy again. Andrew Erickson, this tier of quarterbacks in this tier 3, who is it that you think can break out?
Yeah, so it actually says in my my footnotes here, the late round quarterback to target if Trey Lance has already been selected. So I think that Lance is the correct answer here. But if he's off the board, you're scrambling. I still like Justin Fields. So you look at what he did in his last 4 starts last year: QB3, QB9, QB8, QB10. So he was a top 10 quarterback in all of his starts. 44% top 12 hit rate last year in 9 full games played. That was identical to Derek Carr. And it was basically a train wreck in all those games where he was basically finishing as a QB1 because he was rushing. And there's no reason to think, with the Bears' lack of investment in the offensive line and in skill players around Justin Fields, that he's not going to stop running. Like, he's going to have to be a rushing quarterback. And I think that's really the name of the game with Fields. And I still think Fields is one of the better quarterbacks out of that class. I think that he had nothing to work with last year. I know we're kind of giving Trevor Lawrence an excuse because of how atrocious the system was around him. I mean, Matt Nagy last year was, it was not good. it was not good. Fields was running the Andy Dalton offense, and it was just not aligned whatsoever. And still, Fields made it. He actually flashed fantasy upside, which we like to see. Mm-hmm. So even though we're not, over excited about the weapons he has, Cole Kmet and Darnell Mooney are like some of these guys we like, but don't necessarily love. I still think it's enough for combining those guys with Fields rushing to make him a quarterback that I think, look, week one's going to come around. He's going to rush for like 60 yards. Be like, wow, we probably should have been ranking Justin Fields as the top 12 quarterback this entire time. And yet his ADP is outside the top 15 quarterbacks. It's just the rushing for Fields is just going to put him up higher than some of these pocket passers where it's easy to look at Derek Carr and be like, oh, like Derek Carr's got all the weapons. He got Devontae. And it's like, yeah, but he doesn't run. And that's going to make all the difference with a Fields over a guy like a Carr or a Cousins, even though we're enamored by how pass happy they'll be and the weapons. It's just, dude, rushing production, like you just do the numbers and you're like, wow, like he doesn't really have to do that much and he can beat these pocket passers.
All right, let's talk about the tier 4 guys. This is deeper into super flex, the guys who can break out of tier 4. Matt Ryan at 19, Ryan Tannehill at 20, then Jameis Winston, Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, Daniel Jones, Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, Deshaun Watson, Davis Mills. Then we get to Mariota, Trubisky, Baker Mayfield, and of course, Jimmy Garoppolo, everyone's favorite. So Andrew Erickson in this tier, who is somebody that can break out of tier 4?
For me, it is someone that is going to recapture what he's done already in the past, and it's Jameis Winston. So in 2021, before he got his injury, he had 2 top 6 finishes in just 7 games with basically no offensive weapons except Alvin Kamara. And all indications are Kamara is going to miss the first 6 weeks of the season. So if you're missing your starting running back, are we going to see a Saints offense give Mark Ingram like 30 carries per game? Is that the plan here? Or is it, hey, let's throw the ball with Jameis Winston, who was less turnover worthy last year? I know that they were limiting his pass attempts, but Winston at least proved, hey, I can hone it in a little bit. I have weapons now with Olave, with Jarvis Landry, potentially Michael Thomas coming back. None of these guys were on the offense last year. Like he actually has weapons to throw, and he already flashed his upside in this Saints offense. You look at Saints quarterbacks as a whole last year, 5 top 6 finishes between Winston, Taysom Hill, and Trevor Siemian. Like there were weeks where we had to stream Trevor Siemian because he was actually putting up numbers. And it's like, how is this guy doing it? A lot of it came in garbage time, but he still ended up putting up numbers. So the Saints quarterback, there is fantasy upside in that position, and it's Jameis Winston. I think it's interesting, too, when you look at the betting markets for Jameis Winston in terms of who's going to lead the NFL in passing yards. Plus 4,000, Jameis Winston has received 18% of the total betting tickets, 27% of the handle, which is the highest among all players, according to Caesar Sportsbook. So I'm not saying like that's the bet to make, but I'm saying a lot of people are putting on money on Jameis Winston to lead the NFL in passing yards. Will he do that? I don't know, but I think it's an indication that the Saints are going to throw more in 2022. It's not going to be the same, let's run the ball the entire time like they did last year, hiding behind Jameis Winston and their other quarterbacks. And it makes sense intuitively based on the moves that they made. Kamara is going to be suspended. Why not throw the ball more with Jameis Winston, who has already shown that he can throw for 5,000 passing yards in a season? So for me, I think Winston has a lot of untapped potential in this offense.
So in tier 4 of quarterbacks, who potentially could jump a tier for you, Freedman?
The name I'm about to say is disgusting. Daniel Jones. He's ADP quarterback 28. He's my quarterback 18. And that, I will say, is a pure upside ranking. That is all that it is. Because I think at this point in the draft, you should be focusing on upside if you're looking at quarterback. And in my fantasy cheat sheet, which is available in the FantasyPros draft kit, nailed it. That's the way you do a plug. Anyway, in that cheat sheet, one of my quick draft tips is to shoot for upside. Like we're Ricky Bobbying this thing. If you are not first, you're last. And Jones has the upside potentially to win fantasy championships, especially I'm thinking in super flex, he would be an ideal upside QB2. Last year, he dealt with injuries. He was injured. His supporting playmakers were injured. And I would say, most importantly, he had the injustice of having to run plays that were called by offensive coordinators, Jason Garrett and Freddie Kitchens. I mean, seriously, talk about going from dumb to dumber. Anyway, he's got good enough receiving weapons around him this year. He's got the rushing ability when he's not falling down on the ground, and he has a massive upgrade in play callers with the addition of new head coach Brian Daboll. So Daniel Jones, It's disgusting, but he was a decent fantasy quarterback last year, and now everything around him is better this year.
All right. Now, I can't let the show end on Daniel Jones. I can't do it. I refuse to do it. As you said, it's a little gross. Hopefully he can realize some of that upside, but instead we will pivot away from the breakout tiers and let's talk to the people. These are the people that want to talk to us. Let's hit the mailbag real quick for a couple questions. Here's one from Crash Davis on Twitter. And I love this question because this is something that really, it irks me and I want to talk about it here. CMC, he says, at what position does drafting him make sense with the injury concerns from the past 2 years? I was hurt both years by drafting him high. Thank you. And this is from Crash Davis. You mentioned earlier, Freedman, about the hero running back strategy, and then you happened to throw the name out Christian McCaffrey. How are we still here? I just want to ask this question because when he came into the league, it was all these concerns. He's 5'11", he's 200 pounds, and he might not be able to withstand the NFL. And then he gets this massive workload, and he bucks all those trends for 2 years, excuse me. And then all of a sudden, all those expectations have come true. And we continue to forgive him about, oh no, it's going to be fine. He's still going to be a top 3 pick. He's still awesome. He's still great. Meanwhile, when the same things happened to Todd Gurley, who had 2,000-yard seasons and all this incredible multi-purpose usage, Todd Gurley, the decline's there. We need to start accounting for it. Why did that happen with Gurley, who is bigger, stronger, all of those things, but it's not happening with McCaffrey? Tell me why.
The thing with Todd Gurley was that he had the ACL injuries, and Christian McCaffrey, when he's been healthy, he's still been the number one producer at his position. You couldn't say the same for Todd Gurley when he was starting to decline with the knee issues. And Christian McCaffrey is still young, and the injuries that he's had aren't ones that are expected to linger into future seasons. Like right now, he's totally healthy. You couldn't say the same thing for Todd Gurley when he was declining.
All right, that's fair. I just want to point out that Todd Gurley's decline season was age 25, and now Christian McCaffrey's 25 too. I just want to have a little fun there. I was prepared for that. I was ready for that potential answer. How about you, Christian McCaffrey? When's appropriate to draft him? Are you somebody that thinks he's safe, Erickson?
I mean, how many running backs are really safe?
None.
If you really
That's
want
why
to be
I keep
safe,
taking wide receivers in the first
draft
round.
Justin Jefferson, who's going to be this year's Cooper Kupp. What are we doing here? I mean, look, if you have been burned by CMC the last 2 years, chances are you're running extremely cold with CMC, so he'll probably break out and have a great year if you don't draft him. Sorry, Crash Davis. But I think that it's just you got to weigh the risks and rewards. Like if you're playing in a 12-team league, yeah, like go after McCaffrey or go after Justin Jefferson, depending on how you set up your team. Like be smart about it. If you draft CMC, a top 5 pick, then you got to know, okay, if he gets hurt, like what am I going to do? Whereas if you draft Justin Jefferson, okay, I feel pretty good about my receiver being there for the entire time. I mean, I'm starting to lean more on taking receivers instead of guys like
you've
CMC.
Come to my camp lately. I've noticed,
especially when it's full point PPR, and I can get guys like Stephon Diggs or like DeAndre Swift in the second round. Like that's what I kind of like doing and starting my draft with a wide receiver. So for me, I would take. I mean, I still think CMC is. I mean, if he falls to like 5, like I'm probably not gonna let him fall outside the top 5 picks, which, depending on the rhetoric in your particular home league, it's possible that, oh no, I'm not touching CMC. And then, oh wow, I'm picking 8th overall and CMC is there. Like, I'm going to take him there.
All right, fair enough. All right, let's get a quick answer for this one. Andrew Erickson, NFD88, wants to know which rookie wide receiver is most likely to have a top 15 ranking next season in redraft leagues. What's the name, Erickson?
I'm so glad you gave me this question because it was one of the few questions I actually looked at and prepared to write for. So
it's nice to know you care about all the work I do before the show. Thank you, Erickson.
So for me, it's Jameis Williams, a wide receiver that's going, very, very late because he's coming off the torn ACL injury. And it's like, dude, we're only going to need to see like 4, 5, 6 games of this guy to realize, oh my God, like this is the guy. He's going to have a sick end of the season, especially with an opportunity that he could get in the Lions offense. And then we're talking about him. Well, Jameis Williams over the last 6 games was wide receiver, top 10 guy. And that's going to vault him into the top 15 conversation next year.
Oh, you touched a nerve because that's like my favorite guy, but I don't know if he can get there with the injury. I hope so. That'd be great. Freedman, who's the name on that list for you?
I mean, nothing says top 15 like 6 great games as the number 2 wide receiver to Jared Goff. That's really, really.
Well, the theme of the show has been the Lions offense now, so we've come full circle here on that one. But what else? Who else you got?
I can actually see Jameson Williams going off and it happening, but I think Drake London is likelier because he's got the draft capital. He's got the full season to show what he can do. He's got the massive catch radius. He broke out at a young age in college. Like, we don't need to talk about all of like the good things that Drake London has. We've been talking about that for months. And so I think he's going to have a Mike Evans type of rookie year where he just dominates at the catch point, and then his quarterback situation improves one way or another going into his sophomore season. He's got a ton of targets coming his way. He's the guy that I would highlight as being the most likely out of the rookie wide receivers to be a top 15 wide receiver next year in ADP. And he's it's just kind of going along with rankings. He's the rookie quarterback. The rookie wide receiver right now that I have ranked highest at Fantasy Pros.
That's fair. And look, I love London. I'm more concerned as I am with the quarterback play in Atlanta. I'm more concerned with the offensive line play. That's really what bugs me about that offense. For me, I think it might be Chris Olave. I think he might just step into a situation where we're talking about, Winston can break out. He can throw for all these yards. Well, who's catching the football? Because I haven't seen Michael Thomas play football in some time. I don't know how healthy he is, if he's ever going to be healthy again. He's also a little older than I think people forget his age. And then, Jarvis Landry is a really nice wide receiver, but Olave, I think, is going to be a really nice, easy transition to the NFL. I could see him being that guy that kind of breaks that top 15 and nobody really saw it coming. I could see that. I could also see Sky Moore, but Derek Brown's not here to talk about it with me, so I can't get too much into that. Gentlemen, this was incredibly fun. It was great to hang out with both of you guys and talk about all these tiers. And again, if you want to look at these tiers and who you think might break out, you could always make comments on the YouTube channel, who you think in the comment section might be the breakouts. And of course, head over to fantasypros.com/rankings to take a look at all of our rankings, and the draft kit, as Freedman so smoothly placed in there, is available for you as well. Also, our Discord channel where you can talk about these breakout guys with us. It's free to join at fantasypros.com/chat. And of course, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at Fantasy Pros. Click that little bell for notifications and go get yourself some free swag from Pristine Auction. That's PRISTINE auction.com. Again, at fantasypros.com/contest. We're giving away a CD Lamb autographed jersey for you for nothing. We're just hanging out and doing what you do anyway, which is watching all the stuff on YouTube. So get yourself some free stuff. Believe me, it's a nice thing to do. So that'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Matthew Freedman and Andrew Erickson, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.